A big hello to all my fellow blasphemers from Revolution Be Damned. Be sure to give me your opinions via the comments box or at revolutionbedamned@outlook.com. Now, it has to be said that religion as a whole is our overall concern. But it is difficult to tackle any one issue without treating it for what it is and investigating it individually. After all, surely it is an injustice to any one religion to associate it with another. So I feel the need to say, which I shouldn't have to, that I am an overall atheist, a word in which I hate because it gives a meaning to a non-believer, which for me gives too much credit to my opponent and their argument. The non-belief in something should not need naming, giving the notion that one side may be wrong when in fact not believing in God should be the norm when it comes to the evidence-based logic. There is no such thing as Santa Clausist or Supermanist. So it would seem this particular subject has been patronised for its own sake. That being said, I'm making it clear, Christianity among others is on my agenda as well, but Islam is a separate topic that is a huge issue in today's problems and the build-up of our future. I felt the need to make a couple short introductions in this video on a particular couple of points in which have been helping to push the elephant in the room back behind its curtain and normalise cult-based violence to those who fall victim to it. Today's liberal media is a wonderfully well thought out distraction tactic aimed at those who have a kind-hearted message but fail to see it would only work in a perfect world. What I keep seeing, despite the religious-based violence taking lives under deliberate action, is people on social media sharing things like Grenfell Tower or KKK posts, anti-Trump memes and so on. This damaging attitude is helped by the liberal media, which insists on making headlines of Diana, a woman who's been dead for 20 years, or making a huge story of Grenfell, which is suspicious as it gets. We had 3 attacks in 4 weeks, which came from deliberate acts of murder with blatant religious involvement, which in 2017 is all the story you need to address the real situation. But instead, when a fire ensues, a following week, caused accidentally, the news cleverly covers it to the point of even more suspicion. The news is still raging about this fire many weeks later, while the terrorist stories were drowned out in a week, with pictures of vigils and Muslims claiming to speak for Islam despite there being very few to show up and not a word from the entire Middle East. A world in which religious texts would condemn them for disagreeing with the killing of non-believers. Now I could give hundreds of examples from newspapers, fake stories, news stories from people such as the BBC who show blatant attempts to soften Islam's meaning and to use it to its own means and to use its own people to defend it via patronising information. The media of today is throwing people such as the KKK or right-wing Nazis into the limelight, and the liberals have followed suit. Now understand this. You must think for yourself and not always listen to what your particular news station says just because it suits your prior belief. Without going into the endless information I could produce to show you why this religion of peace is anything but, and very many examples of the liberal bias and mainstream headlines and stories, I instead appeal to you, the human being who knows right from wrong. Even if I went to America, I would have to go out of my way to find a KKK member or a Nazi. I have lived in and around London City my whole life and have never seen a Nazi. I wouldn't know where to find one. And as for the KKK, I could challenge anyone I knew to name one, and it's a certainty they could not. Whereas if I went to see radical Islam, we only ask questions on the street or act in a way unbecoming to mosque goers to discover the dangers directly in front of us. Whether we speak of dangerous communities in Bedford or Luton, or rape gangs all over from Newcastle to Rotherham, or even the cultural changes from in every city which is seeping into our towns, let's not pretend this is a race issue. I could take you to Turkish, Black, Jewish or Irish areas in London and many more mixed areas for different communities, but the same cannot be said for Islamic countries, and it shows when Islam moves to the West. Once again, I am refraining from giving as many examples as I could, and to save them for the future. but it is a clear sign of fear when it is the only community asking for a double standard, and it asks to be spoken to at a slower speed than the rest of us. This is in fear of offending them. It is offensive to women, gay people, apostates, or free spirits living in countries housing 100 million people facing a death penalty for such freedoms to claim Islam is a religion of peace, or that it falls into the same category of tolerance you think you are betraying. Let's imagine for a moment, void of the millions of facts to be pointed out as to why this particular religion has written permission and cultural beliefs to never accept those who claim to accept them, that instead of 1.3 billion Christians or 1.6 billion Muslims, it was instead 2.9 billion scientists. It is safe to say we would have floating cars and no issues with energy sources, hunger, disease, and many more issues. In fact, we would have to stop giving birth to avoid overpopulation due to scientific need as opposed to a primate instinct to give the difficult issues an easy answer and find reasons to serve our bloodlust. This one point alone, for me at least, would lead me to believe the largest thing holding us down is our primitive needs, which would further give evidence to our evolutionary descendants, as opposed to being made in the form of a perfect deity that would never make such mistakes. Now, for a religion that not only claims to have the answers, but that all other sources in the world are wrong, it certainly doesn't like the idea of defending itself, and in fact often takes the lives of any who dare to do so in the East, and as of recently in the West. But for a religion that knows so much, let's just face this particular issue, and that is that Arabic is everything to Islam. Luckily, the fact Muhammad could not read did not discourage God from choosing him, and even luckier is the fact that God happened to speak Arabic, because of course the world would have been over by now had that coincidence not come about. So what we are faced with here is a language that dictates the exact word of God, in which not all of its followers speak in Middle Eastern and Northern African countries, leaving a perfect platform for those who have undesirable intentions to further use the already violently written texts, causing people who are not fully understanding what they claim to know, and then telling others how they should live their lives as a result. The particular texts that have been translated to their best are disturbing to say the very least, and it is clear Muhammad himself was a formidable opponent to his enemies, and not the sort of man to base any truth from. The Hadith is a biography of Muhammad, and is well worth a look at for any of those who did not feel the Quran was worrying enough. I'm sure this will fill the gap. The idea of being told who you can sleep with and how women will live out their life, or being killed for wanting their own freedoms, choices or opinions is warranted by the ramblings of a man who lived by the sword and himself had multiple wives and gave permission for rape, especially of Jews. So coming away from the obvious point of general confusion within the religion, especially since Muhammad left no structure, causing many factions such as Sunni and Shia to fight over and over to this day, it is difficult to find a voice of reason or negotiate to any standard when the killings inside the religion is even worse than that of outside, due to this man's storytelling. If we now turn to a few figures that will relate as to why I made this video in order to address those who are posting continuous Twitter statuses about liberalism or fall into the Diana Grenfell category, the trap, which even filled the headlines today, despite there being news of possible war with North Korea, and this very subject in which I speak, which could be addressed, as opposed to sidelines for easy viewing. While the protests were going on and the accusations of racism have been thrown around like truth had no meaning, independent sites have been recording the death tolls in 2017 due to Islamic terrorism. And much to my disgust, sources such as Google and Wikipedia have misled some of the truth or made it difficult to find such information. The website ersi.com, which can name and place every terrorist attack, so please feel free to fact check and get back to me, has listed the deaths of 5,289 people this year at the hands of terrorism alone. This is not warfare, but direct cold-blooded violence in the name of God in order to obtain paradise or revelation. So these are victims of terrorism. These are not fighting wars. These are walking down the street. The idea of calling people Nazis or claiming there is a KKK issue is laughable when compared with the issue the world is facing from all religion, but especially the one that is catching up in terms of equality. By claiming there are guilty parties on both sides, it is offensive to the generations that made the West tolerant over time, to the kindness we have offered to the victims that lose their lives unaware of what was coming, to those who are killed for wanting to leave the religion and pursue their own life, to the Hindus, Jews, apostates, gay people, and many others who lost their lives as a result of the laws that we long let go. Another site I cannot recommend enough is religionofpeace.com, which also has a list of over 1,000 lives lost this year due to terrorism, with names and dates to match. As I said before, fact check if you must. The site will help answer a few questions to those of you who are convinced you can speak for what you did not write. On that point, I must further point out it is nonsense to say that the violent Islamic terrorists have the wrong message. Who are you to say who is wrong? Are you suggesting, as a liberal person, you know Islam well enough to dictate the true message and how it should be delivered? With investigation, it would appear those committing violence are following a correct code of conduct and face no such punishment in their homelands due to the Quran or Hadith stating that such actions are not only sanctioned when inflicted on non-believers or Jews or many other people, but in many cases a requirement to obtain true approval from God and His Messenger, and it even gives you many incentives in the afterlife or forgiveness to end your life whilst taking others, or at the very least take others. While looking on Wikipedia, I found they had listed the Joe Cox murder in Finsbury Park Mosque acts of terrorism. Despite them being by fringe lunatics with no backing, and instant condemnation from the Christian and Western world, as opposed to many Islamic attacks with the backing of millions of imams and governments, which have not yet issued any direct fatwa against it or issued any apologies. Now, it is often said by many radio hosts, apologists or political career criminals that the press is right-wing. But I have to go out of my way to buy a paper such as the Daily Mail, but I will be given a free left-wing metro on any train in the city and beyond, which will name so-called racist and seek to glamorise Islam and the destruction of English culture, following direct orders from a scared government, who would not allow them to print to such a mass audience for free without following a guideline in their favour. A paper like the Metro is embedded media at its finest, while people like the BBC make truth look out of fashion. So try not to pick up what you see and take it as truth. Look at history, all the way up to today, and see religion is a cause for many of today's problems. And only you can see that by thinking for yourself, not by looking at a government-made work of fiction that doesn't stand up when compared to uncomfortable truth. It has to be mentioned that the race card has been played too often and lost its legs long ago. It was never a question of colour but culture, which is delivered from religious text. To anyone I respect, skin colour plays no part in their thinking, but ideology does. If I was to proclaim the same things under a different name, I would be labelled as a dangerous person, and this is the underlying truth. The day Israel does not have to hide behind four walls for daring to be Jewish, or Iran feels it is no longer necessary to hang homosexuals from cranes, I'm sure progression will be well underway. But until then, there are many questions you should be asking yourself. If you don't question everything and believe you're safe due to blind faith, what sort of outcome is that going to produce? In life, we should question everything and seek all answers. It's safe to say most liberals have not investigated the issue and have instead took quotes or opinions of people in order to defend, in which undermine their ability to show their genuine evaluation, but instead show a need to feel righteous and a self-appointed defender of the people. If you claim to be a feminist, or you claim to be a protester for gay rights or animal rights or women's rights and so on, then challenge the Middle East. That should be your priority, instead of spitting poison at the community that accepted you a long time ago. The cowardness of seeking to protest causes that there will be no backlash against you in the community you're facing, and it's not even a fraction of the problem, which is so blatant, the cowardice in blaming your own people. When I see feminists attack Islam issues, I will be impressed. But the truth is, the most liberal of liberals knows that if they dared, it would be their undoing. Thus, returning to my point, you should not claim to speak for a religion of peace that would punish you for saying the same things to them. It's the height of hypocrisy. On that note, I shall wrap up by once more saying, let us not confuse a people with a scripture. They are attached to it, and it would be amazing to see those victims free to live their lives as we know they are capable. The East would be as advanced as the West or greater if certain things had not prohibited it. And this is a fact you can see without research. Please feel free to contact me and let me know your opinion on www.revelationbedamned@outlook.com. And remember, your mind is your own, and it would be a shame to pass your life having allowed others to guide your thoughts and your opinions. So let's take one more moment to remember most religions go unnoticed and bother few people while others dominate the globe. But it has to be said across Europe and the world that it is not Jews, it's not Quakers, it's not Protestants, Catholics, Mormons, Scientologists, Lutherans, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, Jedis, whatever you want to be. This is a blatant fact, and to associate terrorism as something we are all responsible for is offensive to those living by the Western rules. On my final point, I have to bring to light the fact fundamentalism and extremism is not the issue. If you are Amish and peace-loving, then the most outlandish and fanatical you become, the less society has to worry about it becoming dangerous. When a text gives you a fanatical right, a reason to carry out things only religion is sick enough to create. Thank you again very much for your time, and remember to think for yourself.